It's sometimes a guilty pleasure to watch the wealthiest families and their drama that they experience in their life. There's TV shows like Succession that really dramatize what this experience is like for these families. In fact, I remember one point in that show where the family, the kids and the parents were negotiating to each other through their attorneys, right? These relationships just seem to break down. And I've had that experience in my own life as well. I've had extended family members who've gone through those situations who have had really strong family bonds and relationships that once a large amount of money is introduced, those relationships are destroyed in a way that can never be repaired, or at least that's how they feel. But it doesn't have to be like that. See, a lot of these challenges aren't necessarily related specifically to the money. It's more deeply the emotional connections. It's how we interact with one another. It's the vulnerability that we build in and actually how we connect with each other. I know many famous rappers have said more money equals more problems. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. And that's why I'm really excited for my guest today, Francesco Lombardo. He is a world-class guy who actually helps some of the world's wealthiest families through these very challenges. But even if your family isn't on that high wealthy end, the insights that he provides can help you and your family build deeper, more meaningful connections. And I know that can help us all. Francesco, thanks for being here today.
Mike, thank you so much for reaching out. We were just talking before the show started about how our first conversation was 6 months ago and how much time flies. So it's great to be here with you.
Yeah, I love it. I want to dive right into it. I want to first understand, since you're dealing with these incredibly wealthy families, what is it actually like for these families when they have all of this money? What's the drama that they're facing?
Well, it's not just wealthy families, it's really a parental issue that's magnified by massive wealth. And, we go to school, we're taught how to speak, we're taught how to write, but yet we're not taught how to have conversations.
Yeah.
And conversations require a couple things for them to be really powerful. They require a deep respect for one another. They require what I call safe space, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And they require trust in that the other person is not going to take advantage or use what you say against you. And the third piece, which is the most important piece, is vulnerability. There has to be a willingness to be vulnerable about what we're thinking and feeling to the best of our ability.
Yeah.
And then,
so what happens within some of these families when they don't have that vulnerability and trust built in?
So what happens is, human beings, let me digress. So everyone comes to me and says, I want to communicate better. And my response is, what does that mean? Do you want to speak in a different language? Do you want to text? Do you want to WhatsApp? For those that remember, do you want a page, fax? What they're really saying is, I want to be able to tell you exactly what I'm thinking and feeling, knowing it's not going to be used against me. And what we forget when we have conversations are made up of two components. There's the external conversation, what we speak and what comes in. But more importantly, there's the internal conversation, what goes on in our mind. And our internal conversation is based on our history, our conditioning, events that happened in the past. And this internal conversation is going to interpret what comes at us based on this. So until we master our internal conversation, external conversations won't be as impactful or vulnerable as it could be.
Yeah, so many of us have this internal dialogue that can be really detrimental to our lives. It can put ourselves down and put us in a negative frame of mind, but we can also start to have a perspective of other people that is more negative than maybe warranted. I've seen that dissolve relationships. But one thing I really like that you said is you need to get to a place where you can feel comfortable being honest with each other, and it's not going to be held against you. For some of these families, they're fighting over, large sums of money, or just having powerful positions, or just being recognized for who they are. How do you go from the state of battle to a state of support?
One of the first things that we do is we have what's called an education day, where we bring all the family members together after we've interviewed each one of them individually, right? They all get the same questions. And we bring them together for half day, and we talk about a concept of safe space. And what safe space basically is, what we didn't get enough of as a child, we're still seeking out as an adult, right? So it could be things like validation, authenticity, vulnerability, owning your voice, that sort of stuff. So we talk about the concept, and then we allow them to experience it, where they share something about themselves with each other. And Mike, I got to tell you, at every single one of these sessions, I'll have siblings in their 50s and 60s that'll say, you know what? I never knew that about you. I never knew Dad treated you that way, or thought of you about that way, or you perceived it that way. And what happens is I can witness with my eyes judgment dissolve into some sort of compassion, right? So what happens is human beings are highly judgmental. I've been observing myself. I've been taking myself through an exercise of observing myself around how judgmental am I? And man, I am a nasty judge, like nasty, right? And then I'm practicing a technique within myself to move from that to compassion. And I just see people transform in front of my eyes based on look at them from compassion versus judgment, right?
Yeah, we can be so judgmental. I have, I see that we have a large staff, and people will come with issues, right? I'm frustrated with XYZ person for whatever reason. And they start giving all of this, they did X, and that makes me believe that their mindset is in a really negative spot. And I feel like half of the work with that person is about helping them back out and say, well, it could be malicious, or maybe it's more this other thing that's not as malicious, and trying to back them away from that judgmental state so they can have a more authentic, real connection with one another. So you're helping people get to this deeper level of connection. Where do you take it next? How do you go to the next level?
Well, it starts with internal connection, right? So because we seem to forget as human beings that the longest relation we're going to have in our lifetime is the one with ourselves, right? And if we have a good relationship with ourselves, in other words, understand who we are, why we are, and what we do, and ultimately get to the place of what I call hug the ugly, right? Which is that part of us that we don't want to look at, that we go, this is so nasty and raunchy. But once we hug it, then it doesn't have power over you. So, my ugly used to be shame because of a whole bunch of things that happened to me as a child. So I was riddled with shame. I was actually emotionally addicted to shame. So everything that I looked at was shame-based, and I would subconsciously shame others. I would project my shame onto them. And when I was able to see that with a coach, and by the way, we can't do this work without a coach, right? And I'm going to give a shout out to my coach, Dov Barron, who was, I think Dov is the most transformative leadership coach out there. I've been working with him for 21 years, and I still work with a man, and I still learn things about myself. So, once we hug our ugly, it's got nowhere to go, right? So it sort of dissolves, and then we step into who we truly are. So the initial journey is about individuals really understanding who they are and what they do. And more importantly, the impact that has on their relationships. So we start there.
How does that manifest itself? If someone hasn't done that work of understanding themselves, if they're in this, like in your situation, a shame cycle, what do families actually experience on a day-to-day basis that starts to break down because they haven't done that deeper work? what external factors do they start noticing that maybe helps them identify that there's deeper work that needs to be done?
It's a great question. Human beings have an incredibly high pain tolerance, particularly
Mm,
emotionally, right? So we hang on to stuff. We sit on emotional challenges, emotional conversations that go unspoken way too long than we have to. And I think at some point, the pain gets bigger than the fear, right?
mm,
Because, I was just co-presented with a colleague of mine here in Toronto yesterday. And one of the advisors said to me, "So why don't families have these conversations? The statistics are there that, families fail. And it's a simple reason. They just don't know how to, right? They don't
mm.
know how to. They think that the status quo is the way it has to be. Like, I have to be angry at my dad, or I have to mistrust my sibling, or, I got to disown a child. No, we don't have to do that. We can do different should we choose to. It's just, is there a genuine desire to change? Because, one of our fundamental beliefs at the firm is if you want different, you got to do different.
Mhm.
And in order to do different, you got to become different. And the only way you become different is you look inside and say, that's working, that's not, change that, improve that. It's that simple. Yet, it's that complicated.
It's so powerful because, as you say, things happen throughout life that give us a little bit of pain that make us start questioning other people around us. But the pain of just dealing with it versus the pain or fear or uncomfort of having to interact with that person to release that steam to figure out a better path forward, it's misweighed until that builds and builds and builds and builds. And then it tips and it explodes.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Mike, it doesn't have to explode. We have a
Yeah.
lot of families that come to us. I was just in Melbourne last week presenting at a conference, and I was interviewing a client on a panel, and I had the founder, and I had his oldest son and a daughter, so 2 out of the 3 siblings. And we start out with asking the founder, why did you want to do this? And his response was, well, I've done a lot of reading, and I've seen how families blow up, and I didn't want that to happen to my family. Yeah, I've made
Mm.
all this money, and I've been really successful. And the goal was to provide freedom for the family, not for them to blow up. So I wanted to be preemptive and deal with these issues now, right? And I just wish more founders and families would do that, because a lot of times families come to us when they're in conflict, when there's a fire. It doesn't have to be that way, because one of our basic human needs is we want to feel emotionally safe in our relationships.
Yeah.
We just don't know how to, because we haven't been taught. Because most of us come from this thing called family, where we've been hurt and injured and abused, sometimes unintentionally, but most of the times unintentionally. And we carry that abuse and that hurt forward into our future. Like a coach of mine says, our past is leaking all over our present, impacting our future.
Mm.
So stop the leakage.
I love that. So you talk about how the first step is to really work on yourself, understanding yourself. Where do you take it after that? How do you start building these connections within the family?
So once we've had what I call created individual safety for the individual. So again, they really understand who they are, what they are, why they do what they do, but more importantly, the impact that has. Then we bring them together. We call what we call relational safety. So it'd be like Mike and I, right, doing a conversation that's structured, but it works because you've taken accountability of your stuff. So have I. Now we're just observing instead of judging.
Mm.
And we recommit to a different way of being in the relationship. Once we've done that, then we move into family meetings. So we bring them all together, and the end game of the family meeting process, what we call emotional governance document. And the values out of the document is in all the conversation we've had leading up to that document. The very first module is where we help the family come up with what are called guiding principles. And, we know a lot of companies or individuals that have their values on the wall sometimes, but they're not living them. And the reason is, in my opinion, is because they haven't been taking the time to define what those are, but more importantly, what's the action that you need to take that shows you're living the definition of that value. So we help families get to that level of awareness. So now they can measure whether they're being transparent or respectful or authentic.
What are some of the examples of the values that have been effective for these families?
The one that comes to mind is transparency, and the definition is we tell each other the truth through vulnerability, and the action is be courageous and speak your truth.
It's great, and it's so hard for people to do.
So it's pretty easy to measure. Am I being courageous and speaking my truth, or am I not? So therefore, am I living the guiding principle of transparency or not?
Do you find that these exercises work even with families with young kids?
Yeah, especially with young kids. And the reason why is young kids haven't had years of conditioning based on their story or their wound put upon them. They're actually like almost clean slates. So, the clients that, the clients that are 16, 17, and 18-year-olds that we work with, they get the stuff so fast. They're not trying to, the ego's not trying to protect itself, right? The ego hasn't been layered upon like a 30 or 40 or 50-year-old has.
Now, there always seems to be some family members out there who are unwilling to change, or they're always super self-interested and they're always in a battle mode and they don't want to do this psychological mumbo jumbo. Yeah. How do you deal with that?
Well, as I tell families, we start with who wants to start, and every family will have a champion. The one that says, this is something we need to look at. We've got to address this to see what's coming. Sometimes they're considered the outlier because, they see things from a different perspective. So every family has a champion, and we start with them, or we start with other champions within the family. And what happens is, when we do this kind of work, energetically we shift. So people go, Mike, did you change your hair? Have you lost weight? Because there's something different about you that they can't pinpoint. But what's happened is energetically you've shifted. And people go, well, I want that, but I don't know what it is. So I'm going to go and do the work. So eventually everybody gets on board over time. But we start with where we start.
Really? So you really get to a point where everyone eventually gets on board? You've never had, I can think of people in my own family that I would say are an extended family. They're sort of lost causes that it's really hard to change or to get them to be on board. How do you crack that hardest nut?
I don't. I let the families do it gently and softly as they evolve and change. Because what happens is, that call it the hard nut, maybe look for battle with Mike. And then when Mike doesn't bite, they go, gee, Mike's different. What's that about? And eventually they get curious.
So you start laying this groundwork of trust and open communication. But eventually you have to get to some of those gnarly issues. Maybe there's two kids who both want to become CEO of the company, or maybe there's certain assets that certain family members want upon the death of the elders. How do you start dealing with those gnarly problems?
Well, we start dealing with those gnarly problems right off the bat because the gnarly problems are in the individuals, so they manifest as feelings of guilt or shame or resentment or anger or rage. And when we start to unpackage those by individuals understanding why they feel that way, but more importantly, the impact that has, as the individual changes, the attitude in conversations about things changes. So they're not bringing, the anger or the shame or the guilt to the conversation about the particular asset or who needs to be the boss. They've let go of that. So they're speaking from a place of authenticity and truth about themselves. They're not fighting about this bottle. They're having a conversation about the bottle. It's different.
Hmm. How long does it take to get a family to that kind of level?
Depends on the family, so typically say 12 to 18 months. So, the education day is a half day session. So if we interview a family, say starting May 1, we could have the education day by the end of May. If they agree to go to the one-on-one coaching, which is the next evolution, so 10 one-on-one sessions individually with me, that gets done over 6 months because we need to accelerate those because it's talking about fundamental behavioral change. And then the family meetings, we do them once a month. And the family meetings are a great place to practice the learning because issues come up. So we get to use those as teaching moments, right? To apply the skills and the tools. So that takes about 10 months. So you look at about, 16 to 18 months, start to finish, give or take.
Sure. So have you ever been called, and I don't know if you can give any specific examples without names, but have you ever been called and like, we have a fire, everything's falling apart, we need your help?
Yeah. I got a call like that where, 5 siblings had sold a business and there was issues around one sibling was involved in running the outfit. The other 4 were, shareholders and received dividends, but weren't involved in the day-to-day decision-making. So the fire was about, this sibling that had helped negotiate the sale of the business compensation for it, right? The other siblings didn't feel he was entitled to X for having sold the business for significant profit. So we had to come in and help manage that conversation around, you made us, you're getting paid X, you're getting really rich, and we don't believe you deserve the comp. So
Makes sense.
so I was brought in to help manage that conversation. And once we, really got uncovered what I call the top level issues, which is the comp issue, it was really about, not feeling valued or not feeling respected, and about, that 1 or 2 of them hadn't been asked to be in the business, so the resentment about that. So it was about a whole other emotional set of issues, not about the compensation. The compensation was the symptom, but it wasn't the issue.
Interesting. So as you guys worked through those deeper emotional issues, did the compensation discussion almost become easy? Was it almost like an obvious answer after working through the deeper issues?
Yeah. Yeah. Because it was like, because, one of the siblings, the one that was running the business, had the belief that I'm not trusted. They're out to get me. That's over here. Over here, a couple of the others had the issue of, we never got a chance to work in the business. So we feel like, dad sort of shafted us, even though we're shareholders. So we'll feel like we're owed. So once we were able to resolve both those sets of issues, it was like, well, actually, you did negotiate the sale. We had nothing to do with it. And we got a whole bunch of benefit in the form of money. So yeah, you should get compensated for what you did. And we got compensated because we're shareholders.
Wow. It's so interesting. When we're dealing with problems in life, I think there's a good lesson there in that usually the problem we're looking at and we're festering about is not really the thing we need to focus on. We need to go a level deeper.
Well, you know what it is, Mike, is we're never fighting about the bottle of water. We're fighting about what it represents to me and what it represents to you from an emotional perspective. Right? So, if it represents to me that, dad shafted me, I'm going to fight for that. If it represents for me that I'm not trusted or respected, I'm going to fight for that. So we don't fight for the issue. We fight for the wound, the conditioning, what's back here. Once we understand this, we go, oh, it's just a ball of water. Got it.
That's awesome. And this is why, the soft stuff is so important. That emotional intelligence we often hear about, it really does make a huge impact on kind of our success in life. You didn't obviously start off life coaching some of the wealthiest families in the world. What is your own journey? How did you get to this point of being this coach to these families?
So I started in wealth management, right? And I was really good at it. So I was, managing money for very, very, very wealthy families. And one day I realized that, I was making a boatload of money, 7 figures, and I was really unhappy. I was this arrogant, self-centered a-hole. And I thought to myself, that doesn't seem right. Like the purpose of making money is to be happy and at peace and this, but I'm this guy. I'm this angry, self-centered guy that was all about, hey, notice me, look at my money, and look at my lifestyle, look at my beautiful women. It was all about that. And I remember I was reviewing my taxes with my accountant, and we're sitting at a coffee shop, and it's like it was yesterday, Mike. He takes his tea and he's stirring, and he taps, tap, 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 puts the spoon down, and he looks at me and he says, "You know what? You're operating at about 2% of your capacity." And I was like, whoa, I was so angry. And I didn't have the emotional integrity at the time to express that anger. So I just bottled it. And I was just furious, fuming. So I went away. And 6 months later, I came back and said, "You know what? You're right. I have no idea what the other 98% is. So what do I do about it?" And he said, "You need to go see a coach, Dov Baron." I went and saw Dov. And what he helped me unpackage was that I was using money as a way to hide the shame that I had inside of me because of what happened to me as a child. I did not have a safe childhood. I was sexually abused by my mother. I was beat by my father. I was bullied by kids in school. And ironically, the only places I felt safe was with my rugby team. It's kind of weird. It's a very violent sport. But I felt safe there because I felt gotten. I felt understood. I felt cared for. Everything that wasn't happening everywhere else. So Dov helped me realize that I was using money as a way to shield that shame and that deep hurt. And that, if I made a lot of money, then I'd be successful, and hey, that would go away. But the reality was the money magnified that. So that was coming up in the a-hole guy. And I quickly realized that, with the help of Dov, that I wanted to create a safer world because I didn't feel safe. And when I looked at the families that I work with, that had substantial financial wealth, I realized that they were unsafe with each other because they didn't know how to talk. Because the belief with wealthy families is that financial wealth creates emotional safety, and it doesn't. It creates the opposite. So I've made it my mission to do that. So that's why I do what I do with the families that I work with.
So you had this realization about wanting to have this deeper, more positive impact. But just because you have that realization doesn't mean you have the emotional skill set and tools to be able to execute that on day one, because you go from being an a-hole to something better. How do you get that skill set to be able to have that impact?
Lots of trial and error. I remember one of my partners at the firm at the time was saying, we can build a family office and I'll do the emotional stuff and the soft issues. And I remember them saying to me, that's your dream, not ours. And, I had to make a decision. I said, do I really want to pursue my purpose or not? And I said, yeah, because if I don't do it, no one else will. So in June of 2008, I said, you guys need to buy me out. So they bought up my shares. I sold my practice, and I left the firm and started to build Veritas. And, it wasn't easy. The first probably 3 or 4 years are what I would call bleeding edge. Right? I was just hemorrhaging savings because I wasn't really sure what I was doing. And then through trial and error, I was able to get, okay, this is what I'm doing. Here's what it looks like. I created a process that I would follow, right? I was able to articulate the deliverable, why it mattered. And, interestingly enough, I wrote the book Safe Space, and I think it got published in 2017. And it's only until now that I really understand what that means. Like, it was a concept, right? Safe space is this sort of ethereal concept. And now I really get what it means, and I'm living it and I'm being it. And I'm able to better communicate it with my clients. And one of the things that makes me, I think, unique in the space is that continues my learning, and I share my learning, my journey with my clients. Because, I'm not ultra high net worth. I don't come from that world, but yet I understand them at a human level because I've done so much work on myself. I understand me.
I love that. You talk about safe space and how you deeply understand it now. Help me understand how you see safe space.
So safe space is simplistically yet in a complex way what we didn't get met emotionally as a child,
Mhm.
but yet what we seek externally as an adult. So for me, I was seeking connection through money and my wine cellar and my cars and my watches and the women I dated. And yet, as a child, I was emotionally disconnected from myself and those that cared for me. Right. So, whatever we lacked emotionally as a child that wasn't met emotionally, you know, our voice, being courageous, being brave, we seek out here externally. Does that make sense?
Interesting. Wow. Well, Francesco, this has been a really interesting conversation. I think one of the things that I am most taking away is not what you're saying, although that's been really interesting. There's there's like a subtext. There's a vulnerability and openness that is so engaging that I really have been enjoying about this conversation. I can see how that resonates with the people that don't have that and want that experience and they're feeling it. And I can feel it just through the conversation with you. And I think that is a really powerful takeaway for all of us as well. Francesco, if people want to learn more about you and about what you do, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Well, we're on LinkedIn. So, Francesco Lombardo on LinkedIn. They can go to our website, which is www.veritage.ca, spelled VERITAGE.ca. There's a whole bunch of information on there, what we do. And we have some video testimonies of clients that have generously said we're willing to share what the experience was like.
Hmm. Well, thank you so much for joining today. This has been such a pleasure getting to connect further with you. I appreciate your genuineness, openness, and vulnerability. And thank you.
Mike, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a real honor and a pleasure. Thank you.